In the autumn of 1953, in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, a 7-year-old girl named Emma Catherine Wells woke screaming with knowledge of a fire that wouldn't happen for 3 more days. What her parents dismissed as a nightmare would prove to be the first manifestation of an ability that would attract the attention of government agencies conducting secret experiments on children throughout the Cold War era. By the time those agencies finished with Emma Wells, she would wish she had never seen tomorrow at all. Before we continue with Emma's story, understand this. What you're about to hear isn't fiction dressed up as fact. This is documented truth about programs that existed, that destroyed children's lives, and that the government still refuses to fully acknowledge 70 years later. If you're ready to learn what really happened to gifted children during America's most paranoid decade, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because Emma's story could have happened in any small town in America. Now let's discover how a little girl's gift became her curse. Emma had experienced strange moments before the night of September 15th, 1953, but she hadn't understood what they meant. 3 weeks earlier, she had told her mother that Grandma was going to bring apple pie on Sunday, even though Grandma hadn't called to say she was visiting. When Grandma arrived unexpectedly with apple pie, Margaret Wells had laughed it off as lucky guessing. 2 weeks before that, Emma had refused to sit in her usual seat on the school bus, insisting something was wrong with it. That afternoon, the seat's metal frame had cracked and collapsed, sending the student who had taken Emma's place tumbling into the aisle with a bruised tailbone and scraped knees. Again, her parents had dismissed it as coincidence, but the night Emma saw Peterson's hardware store burning, there was no dismissing what happened. Emma jerked awake at 2:30 a.m. with her heart hammering and sweat soaking through her pink nightgown. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The vision, she didn't have a word for what she had experienced. But vision came closest, had been so vivid, so real, that her familiar bedroom seemed fake by comparison. She could still smell the smoke, acrid and chemical, burning her nostrils, could still feel the heat of flames against her face, could still hear Mr. Peterson's terrified screams as he broke his office window and prepared to jump. But she hadn't been asleep. That was the part that frightened her most. She had been lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling and thinking about her upcoming birthday party, when suddenly she was somewhere else, standing invisible in Peterson's hardware store, watching flames consume everything, watching Mr. Peterson fight for his life. She had seen it all with perfect clarity. The fire starting in the basement near the paint storage shelves, the orange flames racing up the wooden stairs, the thick black smoke filling the building. Mr. Peterson trapped in his second-floor office, coughing and choking, eyes streaming tears. The desperate decision to break the window, the jump into the firefighter's net below, and somehow, impossibly, Emma knew this hadn't happened yet. She could feel it sitting in the future, waiting to become real. 3 days from now, September 18th, her birthday. The certainty of this knowledge terrified her more than the vision itself. Emma opened her mouth and screamed. Her mother arrived first, Margaret Wells rushing down the hallway in her bathrobe, blonde hair disheveled and eyes wide with panic. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? Mr. Peterson's store is going to burn." The words tumbled out in a rush. "It's going to burn, and he's going to jump out the window, and everything is going to be destroyed." Margaret gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling Emma's racing heartbeat against her chest. "You had a nightmare, honey. It's okay. It wasn't real. It wasn't a nightmare, Mama. I was awake. I saw it happen. But it hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen on my birthday." Robert Wells appeared in the doorway, his reading glasses crooked on his face. "What's all this commotion?" "Emma had a bad dream about Peterson's store burning down," Margaret explained, stroking Emma's hair. But Emma pulled back, her blue eyes fierce with frustration. "It's not a dream. Why won't you listen? I saw it. The fire starts in the basement, where the paint is stored. Mr. Peterson will be in his office upstairs. The smoke will trap him, and he'll have to break his window with his chair and jump. It's all going to happen at 3:47 in the afternoon on Friday." The specificity of details made Robert uncomfortable in ways he couldn't articulate. His 7-year-old daughter shouldn't know about Peterson's basement layout, shouldn't know he kept a wooden chair in his second-floor office, shouldn't be able to predict the exact time of an event that hadn't occurred. "Emma, listen to me. Robert sat on the edge of her bed, trying to inject calm rationality into the conversation. You had a very vivid dream. Sometimes our minds create detailed stories while we sleep, but Mr. Peterson's store is perfectly safe. It's been there for 30 years. Nothing is going to happen to it. Emma looked at her father with an expression that was far too old for her 7 years. You don't believe me, but you will. When it happens exactly like I said, you'll believe me, and then you'll be scared of me, just like everyone was scared of great-grandma Eliza. Margaret's blood ran cold. She had never told Emma about her grandmother Eliza Thornton, about the sight that had made her a pariah in her Vermont community, about the predictions that had proven accurate time and again until the townspeople had driven the family away. How do you know about Eliza? Margaret whispered. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I just know things now, Mama. Lots of things. I know what's in the wrapped presents before I open them. I know when people are going to visit before they arrive. I know what you're going to say before you say it. And I know Mr. Peterson's store is going to burn on Friday at 3:47 in the afternoon, and I can't stop it, and nobody will believe me. Robert and Margaret exchanged a look over their daughter's head, a silent conversation passing between them. Robert's expression said, this is impossible. There must be a rational explanation. Margaret's expression said, what if she's like Eliza? What if it's real? What if our daughter is cursed with the same gift that destroyed my grandmother's life? Let's all try to get some sleep, Margaret said finally, tucking Emma back under her quilt. Tomorrow this will seem less frightening. Everything always seems worse in the middle of the night. But Emma shook her head slowly, her small face set with grim certainty. Tomorrow won't change what I saw, and when it happens, everything will change. For all of us. They left her door ajar, the hallway light casting familiar shadows across her room. But Emma didn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, seeing the vision play out again and again in her mind, wondering why she could see tomorrow, wondering if this was just the beginning, wondering what other terrible things were waiting in the future, queued up like movies about to play. She didn't know yet that her parents were lying awake too, frightened in ways they couldn't name. Didn't know that her mother was remembering every story about grandmother Eliza, every accurate prediction that had made the family outcasts. Didn't know that her father was trying desperately to find logical explanations for the impossible things his daughter had just said. Most of all, Emma didn't know that 300 miles away in Washington, D.C., there were people who would be very interested in a 7-year-old girl who could predict the future with specific accuracy. People who ran programs with names like Bluebird and Artichoke. People who viewed gifted children not as human beings deserving protection but as potential assets in America's war against the Soviet Union. People who would do anything to acquire those assets, no matter how young or vulnerable they might be. The next morning, Emma came down to breakfast quiet and subdued. Her older brother Michael was reading the sports section of the newspaper, and her sister Sarah was practicing her scales at the piano in the living room. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, safe. Feeling better this morning? Margaret asked, serving Emma scrambled eggs and toast. I still know what I know, Mama, Emma said quietly, but I won't talk about it anymore if it upsets you. Margaret felt her heart break a little at the resignation in her 7-year-old's voice. Honey, it's not that you upset me. I just don't want you to be frightened by bad dreams. It wasn't a dream, Emma repeated, but without heat, as if she had already accepted that no one would believe her. She ate her breakfast in silence, then gathered her school books and left for the bus stop. At Millbrook Elementary School, Emma's two best friends, Dorothy Peterson and Alice Sullivan, noticed the change in her immediately. Are you sick? Alice asked, her natural nurturing instincts activated by Emma's unusual quietness. You look pale. Emma glanced at Dorothy, whose father owned the hardware store, and felt a wave of sadness wash over her. In 3 days, Dorothy's father would lose everything he had built over 30 years. His store, his inventory, his livelihood, all consumed by flames while the whole town watched. And Emma couldn't warn them because no one would believe a 7-year-old's dream. I'm fine, Emma lied. Just tired. I didn't sleep well. But as the day progressed, Emma discovered that her ability, curse, gift, whatever it was, hadn't disappeared with the morning light. During arithmetic, she knew which students Mrs. Morrison would call on before she called on them. At recess, she knew that Tommy Henderson was going to fall off the swing set exactly 14 seconds before it happened, and she pulled him back just in time, earning a scolding from the teacher for roughhousing. During lunch, she knew that Alice had forgotten her sandwich at home a full minute before Alice opened her lunchbox and discovered the oversight. Emma had already divided her own lunch in half, ready to share. How did you know? Alice asked. Puzzled, Emma just shrugged. How could she explain that she was seeing everything a few seconds or minutes or hours before it happened? That time itself seemed to have become transparent, allowing her to peer through to events that hadn't occurred yet. She couldn't explain it because she didn't understand it herself. September 16th and 17th crawled past with agonizing slowness. Emma spent those days in a state of anxious dread, watching the future approach like a freight train that she was powerless to stop. She had nightmares both nights, real nightmares this time, mixed with visions of fire and destruction that might have been memories of the future. Her parents watched her carefully, hoping to see signs that she had forgotten her prediction that she was returning to normal childhood concerns about birthday parties and new bicycles. Instead, they saw their youngest daughter withdrawing into herself, becoming quiet and watchful, her blue eyes tracking events invisible to everyone else. Maybe we should call Dr. Morrison, Robert suggested on Wednesday evening. Have him give her a checkup. There might be something physically wrong that's causing these episodes. Margaret knew that no medical examination would explain what was happening to Emma. This wasn't illness. This was inheritance. The same ability that had manifested in grandmother Eliza, now appearing in the next generation. But she couldn't say that to Robert, who believed only in what could be measured and proven. Let's wait until after her birthday, Margaret said. Maybe this is just anxiety about turning 7. Some children have trouble with transitions. But Margaret didn't believe her own explanation, and from Robert's expression, neither did he. September 18th, 1953, Emma's 7th birthday. Margaret woke early to prepare Emma's favorite breakfast, pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream. She had baked a chocolate cake the night before, and it sat on the counter waiting to be frosted with vanilla icing and decorated with 7 pink candles. Emma opened her presents before breakfast, and for a brief moment she seemed like a normal 7-year-old girl again. She squealed with delight over the pink Schwinn bicycle with white streamers on the handlebars. She hugged her brother for the set of colored pencils. She admired the doll dress her sister had sewn. She thanked her grandmother for the beautiful children's Bible with her name embossed in gold. For those few minutes, Margaret allowed herself to hope that everything would be fine, that Emma's prediction would prove false, that life would continue in its comfortable, predictable patterns. Then Emma looked up at her mother, and Margaret saw knowledge in those blue eyes that no child should possess. "It's today, Mama," Emma said quietly, "at 3:47. You'll see." The day proceeded with surreal normalcy. Emma went to school. Margaret attended her church volunteer meeting. Robert went to his office at the textile mill. The sun shone in a cloudless autumn sky. Main Street bustled with its usual midweek activity. At 3:30, Margaret was in her kitchen frosting Emma's birthday cake, humming along to the radio. She had almost convinced herself that nothing was going to happen, that her daughter's prediction had been nothing more than an elaborate anxiety dream. Then, at 3:47 p.m. exactly, she heard the sirens. The sound started distant and rapidly grew louder. Fire trucks racing down Main Street, their bells clanging with urgent alarm. Margaret's hands froze on the spatula. The frosting knife clattered to the counter. She didn't need to look out the window to know where the fire trucks were heading, but she looked anyway. Thick black smoke was rising into the autumn sky from the direction of downtown Millbrook, exactly where Peterson's hardware store stood on Main Street. Even from 3 blocks away, Margaret could see the orange glow of flames visible through the store's large front windows. Mrs. Henderson came running across the lawn, still wearing her house slippers, her face flushed with excitement and horror. "Margaret, Peterson's hardware is on fire. The whole building is going up." Margaret stood paralyzed in her kitchen, the birthday cake forgotten, watching the column of smoke rise higher and higher into the perfect blue sky. Around her, neighbors were rushing toward Main Street, drawn by the spectacle of disaster, eager to witness the worst fire Millbrook had seen in decades. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, home from school, still wearing the pink birthday dress Margaret had sewn for this special day. Her expression was calm, but infinitely sad. "I tried to tell you, Mama," she said softly. "I tried to warn everyone." The fire department's report would later detail exactly what had happened. The blaze had started in the basement at approximately 3:47 p.m., originating in the paint storage area where improperly sealed containers of paint thinner had been stacked too close to the coal furnace. The chemical vapors had ignited, causing an explosion that sent flames racing through the building with terrifying speed. Mr. Peterson, working in his second-floor office reviewing inventory, had found himself trapped by smoke and flames. Unable to reach the staircase, he had broken his window with his wooden desk chair. It had taken 3 attempts to shatter the glass, just as Emma had described, and had jumped into the safety net held by firefighters below. The building burned for 4 hours, despite the efforts of fire departments from 3 surrounding towns. By sunset, Peterson's hardware store was nothing but blackened walls and ashes, exactly as Emma had predicted 3 days earlier. Robert Wells came home from the mill early, his face grey with shock. He found Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, the birthday cake still half frosted, while Emma played quietly in the living room. "You heard about Petersons?" he asked unnecessarily. Margaret nodded, unable to speak. "Frank Peterson jumped from the second-story window," Robert continued, loosening his tie with trembling fingers. "The fire marshal says it started in the basement, near the paint storage. Chemical combustion or something. Frank is lucky to be alive." He sank into a chair across from Margaret, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "She knew, Margaret. 3 days ago, Emma knew exactly what was going to happen. The basement, the paint, the second-floor window, the jump, she knew it all." Margaret reached across the table and took her husband's hand. "My grandmother Eliza used to say the sight was a curse disguised as a gift. She said knowing the future was like being forced to watch people you love walk toward disasters you couldn't prevent. She said it broke her heart 1,000 times before it finally killed her." "What do we do?" Robert asked, and for the first time in their marriage, Margaret heard genuine fear in his voice. "If Emma really can see the future, what does that mean? What's going to happen to her?" Before Margaret could answer, Emma appeared in the doorway. She had changed out of her birthday dress into her regular play clothes, and she was holding the children's Bible her grandmother had given her that morning. "I saw something else," Emma said, her voice small and frightened. "While I was opening my presents this morning, I saw something new, something worse than the fire." Margaret felt her blood turn to ice. "What did you see, sweetheart?" Emma's blue eyes filled with tears. "Bobby Sullivan, Alice's little brother. Tomorrow he's going to fall out of the big oak tree in their backyard. He's going to break his arm really bad. It's going to happen at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, and they're going to have to take him to the hospital in Hartford for surgery because the bones break in 2 places." The specificity was horrifying. The calm, matter-of-fact way Emma delivered information about a 5-year-old boy's impending injury was perhaps even more disturbing than the prediction itself. "Are you certain?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. Emma nodded. "As certain as I was about Mr. Peterson's store. I can see it, Daddy. I can see Bobby climbing the tree, laughing because he thinks he's being brave. I can see the branch breaking under his weight. I can see him falling. I can hear him screaming, and I can't stop it because nobody believes me until it's too late." Margaret and Robert faced an impossible decision. They could call the Sullivans and warn them, risking being labeled as superstitious fools or attention-seeking troublemakers, or they could remain silent and carry the guilt of knowing they might have prevented a child's injury. "We have to try," Margaret said finally. "Even if they don't believe us, even if they think we're crazy, we have to try to warn them." That evening, after Emma's subdued birthday dinner, the cake tasted like ashes in their mouths. Margaret called Alice Sullivan's mother, Mrs. Catherine Sullivan, wife of the town's only dentist. The conversation was excruciating. "Catherine, this is Margaret Wells. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to warn you about something." "Warn me?" Mrs. Sullivan's voice carried polite confusion. "About what?" "It's about Bobby. My daughter Emma had a very vivid premonition, I suppose you'd call it. She believes Bobby is going to fall from the oak tree in your backyard tomorrow afternoon. She says it will happen at 4:15 and that he'll break his arm badly enough to require surgery." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. "Margaret," Mrs. Sullivan said finally, her tone shifting from confusion to poorly concealed irritation. "I appreciate your concern, but Bobby climbs that tree every single day. He's been climbing it since he was 3 years old. I can't keep him locked inside based on a child's dream. Surely you understand that." "I know how it sounds," Margaret pressed on, desperation creeping into her voice. "But Emma predicted the fire at Peterson's Hardware. 3 days before it happened, she described every detail. The basement, the paint storage, Mr. Peterson jumping from the window, all of it. Catherine, what if she's right again?" Another long pause. When Mrs. Sullivan spoke again, her voice had turned cold. "Margaret, I don't know what game you're playing, but using the tragedy at Peterson's store to frighten people with superstitious nonsense is in very poor taste. I think it would be best if we ended this conversation." The line went dead. Margaret stood holding the telephone receiver, listening to the dial tone, knowing she had just damaged a friendship and accomplished nothing. "Mrs. Sullivan thought she was crazy or malicious or both. Tomorrow, Bobby Sullivan would climb that oak tree, and no warning would prevent what Emma had foreseen. September 19th, 1953, dawned clear and unseasonably warm, the kind of perfect autumn day that made children eager to play outside after school. Margaret spent the morning in a state of anxious dread, unable to concentrate on household tasks, watching the clock creep toward 4:15 p.m. At 4:10, she stood at her kitchen window, looking toward the Sullivan house 3 doors down. She could see Bobby in the backyard, his red shirt bright against the green grass. At 4:13, Bobby began climbing the massive oak tree that dominated the Sullivans' yard. At 4:14, Margaret almost ran from her house, almost raced down the street to physically pull the boy from the tree. But what would she say? How would she explain her certainty that disaster was seconds away? At exactly 4:15 p.m., Bobby Sullivan lost his grip on a branch 20 feet above the ground. Margaret watched it happen as if in slow motion, the small body falling, the sickening impact as he hit the packed earth below, the high, thin scream of pain that brought Mrs. Sullivan running from her house. Within minutes, the ambulance was racing down Maple Street, its siren wailing. Within an hour, Bobby was in surgery at Hartford Hospital, where doctors worked to set compound fractures of both the radius and ulna in his left arm, inserting metal pins to hold the shattered bones in place. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, and this time the connection to Emma's prediction couldn't be ignored or dismissed as coincidence. By evening, the Wells family's telephone began to ring. The first call came from Mrs. Sullivan, her voice thick with tears and guilt. "Margaret, I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. I don't know what I thought, but Emma was right about everything. The tree, the time, the arm, even the surgery. How did she know? How could she possibly have known?" Margaret had no answer to give her, because she didn't understand it herself. The second call came from Dorothy Peterson's mother. "Margaret, is it true that Emma predicted my husband's fire before it happened?" Mrs. Sullivan said Emma warned you about Bobby falling, and that she'd warned you about the hardware store fire too. Is that true? More calls followed, some curious, some frightened, some demanding to know what else Emma had seen. Some wanted her to predict lottery numbers or tell them who would win the World Series. Others wanted to know if their families were safe, if disasters were coming, if Emma had seen their futures. By nightfall, Robert had unplugged the telephone, unable to bear the constant ringing, the mixture of fear and avarice in people's voices as they asked a 7-year-old child to tell them tomorrow's secrets. Emma sat on the stairs, listening to her parents argue in the kitchen about what to do. Her father wanted to take her to a doctor to find a medical explanation for what was happening. Her mother wanted to protect her from the attention that would inevitably come. The same attention that had destroyed grandmother Eliza's life. Neither of them knew that their arguments were already too late. That evening, 300 miles away in Washington, D.C., a classified report crossed the desk of Dr. Harrison Mitchell, a senior researcher in the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. The report, compiled from routine monitoring of small-town newspaper reports and police radio frequencies, flagged an unusual pattern in Millbrook, Connecticut. A 7-year-old girl had accurately predicted a major fire 3 days before it occurred. The same girl had then predicted a child's injury with precise accuracy regarding time and nature of the accident. Local reports indicated the predictions included specific details that couldn't be explained by coincidence or lucky guessing. Dr. Mitchell read the report 3 times, his pulse quickening with each reading. He had been searching for exactly this kind of case for over 2 years, ever since Project Bluebird had been authorized to investigate and develop potential psychic abilities for intelligence-gathering purposes. If the reports from Millbrook were accurate, Emma Wells might possess genuine precognitive abilities, and if those abilities could be studied, understood, and potentially enhanced through the experimental protocols Mitchell had developed, she could become an invaluable asset in America's Cold War against the Soviet Union. The fact that she was only 7 years old was unfortunate but not disqualifying. In some ways, it was advantageous. Young minds were more malleable, more trainable, less likely to resist the conditioning protocols that Mitchell had refined over the past 18 months. He drafted orders for a field investigation, marked the file with the highest security classification, and initiated procedures that would send an operative to Millbrook within 48 hours. Emma Wells had seen tomorrow. Soon she would discover that seeing the future was the least terrifying of the abilities that Dr. Mitchell and his team would force her to develop. Back in Millbrook, Emma lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, sensing new visions forming at the edges of her consciousness. She saw a man in a dark suit arriving at her house. She saw her parents' frightened faces as he showed them official documents. She saw herself in a grey room with no windows, wires attached to her head, while strange strangers watched her through a mirror that wasn't really a mirror. She saw pain and fear and loneliness stretching ahead for years, and she knew, with the terrible certainty that had become her curse, that this future couldn't be prevented. It was already in motion, already inevitable, already waiting for her, like the fire that had consumed Peterson's hardware, like the fall that had broken Bobby Sullivan's arm. Some futures, Emma was learning, couldn't be changed no matter how clearly you saw them coming. The only question was whether she would survive what was coming, or whether the government's experiments would destroy her the way they had destroyed so many other gifted children whose stories would never be told. Tomorrow was coming, and Emma Wells could see it clearly. She just wished she couldn't. The man in the dark suit arrived in Millbrook on September 22nd, 1953, exactly 3 days after Bobby Sullivan's fall from the oak tree, driving a black Chevrolet sedan with government plates that he had carefully removed and replaced with Connecticut civilian registration before entering the town limits. Dr. Harrison Mitchell had learned through years of classified fieldwork that approaching families with obvious federal credentials created immediate resistance and suspicion, whereas presenting himself as a concerned academic researcher opened doors that badges and official documents would slam shut. Before we continue with Emma's story and the moment that would change her life forever, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because what you're about to hear reveals classified programs that the government denied existed until documents were finally declassified in the 1990s. Project Bluebird, which later became Project Artichoke and eventually MKUltra, conducted experiments on children throughout the 1950s and 60s, using techniques that violated every ethical principle of medical research. These experiments happened, these children suffered, and the people responsible were never held accountable. Hit that like button if you believe these stories need to be told, and drop a comment telling us what state you're watching from. Now let's discover what happened when Dr. Mitchell came for Emma Wells. Mitchell had spent 3 days studying everything he could learn about the Wells family, assembling a psychological profile that would allow him to approach them with maximum effectiveness. He knew that Robert Wells valued education and scientific thinking over superstition. He knew that Margaret Wells came from a family with a history of claimed psychic abilities that had resulted in social ostracism. Most importantly, he knew that both parents were desperate for someone who could explain their daughter's terrifying gift and offer legitimate help. The house at 47 Maple Street was exactly as Mitchell expected, a well-maintained colonial with the modest prosperity that characterized America's expanding middle class. He parked on the street rather than the driveway, a subtle psychological choice that suggested a friendly visit rather than an official intrusion. He had dressed carefully, conservative dark suit, Yale University tie, wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a benevolent professor rather than a government operative running classified experiments on children. His briefcase contained expertly forged credentials from Yale's Department of Psychology, fabricated research papers on childhood cognitive development, and testimonials from invented colleagues. What it didn't contain was any mention of Project Bluebird, the CIA's program investigating mind control and psychic phenomena. It didn't mention the 43 children he had already recruited, or the ones who had suffered permanent psychological damage, or the 2 who had died during testing protocols that pushed young minds beyond their breaking points. Mitchell knocked at exactly 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, calculated to find Margaret at home while Robert was at work and the children were at school. Margaret Wells opened the door wearing a floral print dress and an apron dusted with flour. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her blue eyes showed the strain of the past week's events. She looked tired, worried, and wary of strangers, exactly as Mitchell had anticipated. "Mrs. Wells, my name is Dr. Harrison Mitchell. I'm a child development researcher from Yale University." He offered his warmest smile. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I've been reading remarkable reports about your daughter Emma, and I wondered if I might have a few minutes of your time." Margaret's expression shifted immediately to hope mixed with fear. "You've heard about Emma? All the way at Yale?" "Mrs. Wells, my research focuses specifically on children who demonstrate unusual cognitive abilities. When I heard reports of a 7-year-old girl who had accurately predicted a fire and an accident with remarkable specificity, I knew I needed to speak with your family." Mitchell's voice carried the perfect balance of professional interest and compassionate concern. "I've worked with several children who have similar abilities, and I believe I might be able to help you understand what Emma is experiencing." The mention of other children with similar abilities was the key that unlocked Margaret's resistance. The isolation of being the only family dealing with such phenomena had been crushing. "Please come in," Margaret said. "Though I should tell you, my husband Robert is quite skeptical about all of this." "That's entirely understandable," Mitchell said smoothly, stepping into the comfortable living room. "Any rational parent would see seek conventional explanations first. But sometimes we encounter phenomena that exist outside the boundaries of conventional science. That doesn't make them any less real or worthy of serious study. Over coffee, Margaret poured out the entire story. Emma's 2:30 a.m. awakening on September 15th, the terrifying specificity of her description of Peterson's fire, the parents' dismissal of it as nightmare, and then the horrifying accuracy when it happened exactly as predicted 3 days later. She described Emma's second prediction about Bobby Sullivan and the guilt that had haunted her since watching the 5-year-old fall. Mitchell listened with apparent sympathy, taking detailed notes and asking precisely calibrated questions. Has Emma had any other predictions since Bobby's accident? Small things, mostly. She knows when the phone is going to ring before it rings. She knows what people are going to say before they say it. She's become so quiet and withdrawn. She says it's hard to live in the present when she keeps seeing the future. Mitchell made a note, internally calculating how this psychological profile would respond to various testing protocols. Mrs. Wells, what I'm about to tell you is based on years of research with children who have abilities similar to Emma's. These abilities, precognition, clairvoyance, they're real, but children who manifest them often suffer tremendously because they don't know how to control what they're experiencing. He paused before continuing. I've developed training methods that can help children like Emma understand their abilities and develop control over when and how the visions occur. I've worked with 17 children over the past 3 years, and in every case we've seen dramatic improvement once they learned to manage their abilities properly. The number was a lie. He had worked with 43 children in various classified programs, and the success rate was nowhere near the 100% he was implying. Could you help Emma? Margaret asked with desperate hope. I believe I can, but I would need to conduct a comprehensive assessment first. Cognitive testing, interviews, controlled experiments. This would require Emma to spend some time at our research facility at Yale, where we have specialized equipment and controlled environments. He saw Margaret's expression shift toward uncertainty. I know the idea of sending your daughter away sounds frightening, but our facility is specifically designed for children. Most assessments take between 4 and 6 weeks, and parents are welcome to visit on weekends. 4 to 6 weeks? Margaret's voice rose. That's over a month. Consider the alternative, Mrs. Wells. Emma's abilities are only going to become stronger as she gets older. Right now, she's experiencing uncontrolled visions that are disrupting her life. Without proper training, this could worsen. She could develop serious psychological problems, anxiety disorders, depression, even psychotic breaks, if the visions become too intense. The warnings were based on real possibilities Mitchell had seen. What he didn't mention was that his interventions had caused just as many psychological problems as they had prevented. With proper training, Emma could learn to control her gift. She could choose when to access her abilities and when to block them out. She could live a normal life. Isn't that what you want for your daughter? Before Margaret could respond, the front door opened. Robert Wells had come home for lunch, immediately suspicious at finding a stranger having an intense conversation with his wife. Margaret, what's going on here? Mitchell stood smoothly, extending his hand. Mr. Wells, I'm Dr. Harrison Mitchell from Yale University. I'm a researcher specializing in childhood cognitive development, and I've been discussing your daughter's remarkable abilities with your wife. Robert's handshake was perfunctory, his body language defensive. Yale University? How did you even hear about Emma? For the next 30 minutes, Mitchell repeated his presentation, adjusting his approach to appeal to Robert's preference for scientific explanations. He spoke about neural pathways and cognitive development, statistical analyses, and experimental protocols. He showed Robert the fabricated research papers with impressive graphs and data tables. I want to be completely transparent with you both, Mitchell said. The research I'm conducting is partially funded by government grants related to understanding human cognitive potential. There's tremendous scientific interest in these abilities from defense and intelligence agencies exploring every possible avenue for gaining advantages over our adversaries. The admission of government involvement was calculated. If the Wells family later discovered the CIA connection, Mitchell wanted them to believe he had been honest from the beginning. What he didn't mention was that the academic research was entirely fictional. Government funding, Robert's suspicion returned. What does the government want with children who have premonitions? Mr. Wells, we're in the middle of a Cold War with the Soviet Union. Both sides are exploring unconventional capabilities that might provide strategic advantages. The Soviets are running their own programs investigating psychic phenomena. We know this from intelligence reports. But more importantly, Emma needs help whether or not her abilities ever serve any national purpose. She's suffering right now, and it's only going to worsen without intervention. Margaret and Robert exchanged a long look, wordless communication conveying volumes of doubt, fear, and desperation. "We'd need to think about this," Robert said finally, "and we'd need to talk to Emma. Of course, this is an enormous decision. Take a few days to consider what I've told you. I'll be staying at the Millbrook Inn for the rest of the week." He stood, gathering his briefcase. "I want you to know that Emma has an extraordinary gift, and with proper guidance, she could do remarkable things while living a happy, healthy life. The choice is entirely yours." After Mitchell left, Margaret and Robert sat in silence for a long time. "What do you think?" Margaret asked finally. Robert removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He seemed legitimate. Yale credentials, scientific approach, reasonable explanations, but something about him made me uncomfortable. He knew so much about Emma, details that haven't been in the newspapers. How did he know about the smaller predictions? Before they could discuss further, Emma arrived home from school. She stopped in the living room doorway, her small face suddenly pale. "A man was here," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "A man in a dark suit who wants to take me away." Margaret felt her blood run cold. "Emma, honey, how did you—" "I saw him this morning before school," Emma interrupted, her blue eyes wide and frightened. "I saw him coming to our house. I saw him talking to you and Daddy. I saw him smiling, but his smile was wrong, like it wasn't real. And I saw—" She stopped, biting her lip. "What did you see, sweetheart?" Robert asked gently. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw myself in a grey room with no windows. There were wires attached to my head, and machines making beeping sounds, and people watching me through glass. I was crying and asking to go home, but nobody would listen, and the man in the dark suit was there, writing in his notebook, watching me like I was a bug in a jar instead of a person." The specificity was chilling. Margaret gathered Emma into her arms. "It's just a vision, baby. It doesn't mean that's what will happen. We can make different choices." But Emma shook her head. "Some futures can't be changed, Mama. When I see something with this much clarity, it means it's already decided. The man is going to take me away, and there's nothing we can do to stop it." Robert knelt beside them. "Emma, listen to me. We're your parents. Nobody can take you anywhere without our permission. You're safe here with us." Emma looked at her father with eyes that seemed to hold knowledge far beyond her 7 years. "Daddy, I love you, but you're wrong. The man is going to make it seem like you don't have a choice. He's going to make you believe that sending me away is the only way to help me. And you're going to believe him because you want so badly to help me, and you don't know what else to do." She stood alone in the middle of the living room, looking impossibly small and impossibly old. "I've seen how this ends. I've seen the grey room and the machines and the tests that hurt. I've seen myself getting sick from the things they do to me." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about her grandmother Eliza Thornton, who had possessed the sight and had been driven from her Vermont community by fear and suspicion. Eliza had made accurate predictions for years until the townspeople called her a witch and forced the family to move. Margaret's mother had warned her, "Never speak of knowing things before they happen. People fear what they don't understand, and they destroy what they fear." Now Emma was showing the same abilities, and Margaret faced an impossible choice. Keep her daughter home and watch her suffer with visions she couldn't control, or send her to strangers who promised help but might exploit her instead. The next 3 days were agonizing. Robert made discreet inquiries about Dr. Mitchell, calling Yale's main office and confirming that yes, there was a Dr. Harrison Mitchell affiliated with the psychology department. He didn't know that Mitchell's affiliation was a cover story maintained by CIA resources, complete with false publications and fabricated academic history. Margaret spoke with Father O'Brien at their church, asking in hypothetical terms whether it was right to send a child away for special treatment. The priest had been sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful, suggesting prayer and faith. They even consulted Dr. Morrison, the town's general practitioner, who admitted he had no medical explanation for Emma's abilities and suggested that specialized research might indeed be beneficial. Each conversation pushed them closer to the decision that Emma had already foreseen. Meanwhile, Emma spent her days in a fog of visions. She saw fragments of her future. The grey room, yes, but also other children like her, scared and confused. She saw a girl about her age with dark hair who could move objects with her mind. She saw a boy who could hear people's thoughts. She saw them all trapped in the same facility, subjected to tests that left them exhausted and traumatized. She saw herself learning to hide her abilities, to give Mitchell and his colleagues just enough to keep them interested, but not enough to reveal the full extent of what she could do. She saw herself surviving by becoming invisible, by pretending to be less than she was, and she saw herself coming home eventually, years later, broken in ways that didn't show on the outside. On Friday evening, September 25th, Robert called the Millbrook Inn and asked to speak with Dr. Harrison Mitchell. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Robert Wells. My wife and I have discussed your proposal, and we've decided to move forward with the assessment. But we have conditions. Mitchell's voice was warm and understanding. Of course, Mr. Wells. What conditions? We want to visit regularly, every weekend, not every other weekend. We want to speak with Emma by phone at least twice a week. We want to see the facility before she goes. And if at any point we're not satisfied with her treatment, we bring her home immediately. No arguments, no delays. Those terms are completely reasonable, Mitchell said smoothly, already knowing that each condition would be gradually eroded once Emma was in his facility. Phone calls would be restricted due to interference with treatment protocols. Visits would be postponed because of critical testing phases, and bringing her home would become legally complicated once certain documents were signed. When would Emma need to come to Yale? Robert asked. I can have everything arranged by Monday. We'll send a car to collect Emma at 9 a.m., and you're both welcome to accompany her to tour the facility and ensure she's settled comfortably. After Robert hung up, he found Margaret in Emma's room, sitting on the edge of their daughter's bed. Emma was already asleep, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, looking peaceful in a way she rarely did while awake. I called Mitchell, Robert said quietly. We're sending her on Monday. Margaret's tears fell silently. Are we doing the right thing? I don't know, Robert admitted, but I don't know what else to do. If we keep her here, she'll suffer. If we send her to Yale, maybe they can help her. We have to try. What neither of them knew was that Emma was not actually asleep. She was lying still with her eyes closed, listening to her parents' anguished conversation, tears sliding silently down her own cheeks. She had seen this moment weeks ago. She knew every word they would say, every decision they would make, and she knew that on Monday morning she would climb into that black car and begin a journey that would change her forever. The weekend passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Margaret baked Emma's favorite cookies. Robert took the family to the movies on Saturday, watching Shane, while Emma sat between her parents, holding their hands, memorizing the feeling of their fingers intertwined with hers. On Sunday, they went to church, where Father O'Brien offered a special blessing for Emma's educational journey. The entire congregation knew she was leaving, though they didn't know the real reason. Mrs. Sullivan approached after the service, still guilt-stricken about not believing Emma's warning about Bobby. I hope they can help her, Mrs. Sullivan said, squeezing Margaret's hand. Emma has a special gift. Maybe these Yale people can teach her to use it without suffering so much. Margaret could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That evening, Emma's siblings finally understood their sister was really leaving. Michael, at 12, tried to be brave. You'll come home soon, right? And you'll write to us? I'll come home, Emma promised, though she knew it would be much longer than anyone expected. And I'll write when they let me. Sarah, only 10, cried openly. I don't want you to go. You're my little sister. Who's going to help me with my homework? Emma hugged her fiercely. You're smarter than you think, Sarah. You don't need my help. You just need to believe in yourself. After her siblings went to bed, Emma found her parents in the kitchen. Robert was smoking his pipe, something he only did when deeply troubled. Margaret was pretending to wash dishes that were already clean. I want you to know something, Emma said, her small voice steady and clear. What happens to me at that place? It's not your fault. You're doing what you think is right. And I don't blame you. I love you both, and I always will, no matter what. Margaret dropped the dish she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but she didn't care. She gathered Emma into her arms and sobbed. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, Mama, Emma whispered. Just remember me the way I am right now. Remember me before I change. That night, Emma lay in her bed for the last time, as the child she had been. She stared at the ceiling, seeing visions of tomorrow cascading through her mind like a terrible movie she couldn't turn off. She saw the black car arriving at 9 a.m. exactly. She saw Dr. Mitchell's false smile. She saw her parents' faces as they tried to convince themselves they were doing the right thing. She saw the long drive to the facility that wasn't actually at Yale University, but was instead a classified installation in rural Connecticut, hidden behind walls and armed guards. She saw the intake process, the medical examination, the psychological evaluation. She saw the moment when her parents would be told that visiting hours were over, when they would be escorted to the exit, when she would watch them leave and realize she was truly alone. She saw all of this, and she accepted it because she had learned that some futures couldn't be changed no matter how clearly you saw them coming. At 3 a.m., Emma finally fell into an exhausted sleep, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't dream of the future. Instead, she dreamed of the past, of playing with Dorothy and Alice, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, of her mother's voice singing lullabies, of her father's strong hands lifting her high in the air. She dreamed of being an ordinary 7-year-old girl whose biggest worry was whether she would get training wheels or a two-wheeler for her birthday. She dreamed of being normal, and when she woke on Monday morning, September 28th, 1953, that dream was over forever. The black car was already waiting outside when Emma came downstairs in her best dress, carrying a small suitcase her mother had packed with clothes, books, and her grandmother's silver rosary. Dr. Harrison Mitchell stood beside the car, clipboard in hand, smile in place, ready to collect his newest acquisition for Project Bluebird. Emma Catherine Wells, age 7, walked out of her childhood home and into a nightmare that would last far longer than the 4 to 6 weeks her parents had been promised. The future she had seen so clearly was about to become the present, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The black Chevrolet sedan pulled away from 47 Maple Street at exactly 9:17 a.m. on September 28, 1953, carrying Emma Catherine Wells toward a future she had already seen in terrifying detail, but was powerless to prevent. In the back seat, she sat between her parents, holding her mother's hand on one side and her father's on the other, memorizing the warmth of their touch while watching the familiar streets of Millbrook disappear through the rear window. Before we continue with Emma's journey into the classified facility where Project Bluebird conducted experiments that the government would deny for 40 years, make sure you understand what you're about to hear. The techniques described in this chapter, sensory deprivation, electroshock therapy, pharmaceutical manipulation of children's minds, these weren't invented for this story. These were real methods used on real children in programs that operated throughout the 1950s and 60s. Documents declassified in the 1990s confirmed what survivors had been claiming for decades. The CIA experimented on American children without consent, without oversight, and without accountability. If you're ready to hear the truth about what happened to kids like Emma Wells, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because these facilities existed in your state too, hidden behind university names and research grants. Now let's discover what really happened when Emma entered the grey room. Dr. Harrison Mitchell sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at his newest acquisition with the satisfied expression of a collector who had secured a particularly valuable piece. He made pleasant conversation during the drive, asking Emma about her favorite subjects in school, her hobbies, her friends, questions designed to establish rapport and gather psychological data that would inform later testing protocols. Emma answered politely but minimally, already implementing the survival strategy she had seen in her visions. Reveal nothing unnecessary, volunteer no information, become as invisible as possible within the system that was about to swallow her whole. "You're going to meet some other special children at the facility," Mitchell said with practiced enthusiasm. "Boys and girls your age who have abilities similar to yours. I think you'll enjoy having friends who understand what you're experiencing." Emma said nothing, but she already knew about the other children. She had seen them in her visions. Sarah Chen, age 8, who could move small objects with her mind, but whose abilities gave her crushing headaches that left her vomiting and crying. Thomas Rivera, age 9, who could hear other people's thoughts but couldn't turn the ability off, drowning in a constant flood of mental noise that was slowly driving him insane. And others, each with their own gift that had become a curse, each trapped in Mitchell's facility and subjected to experiments that pushed their young minds beyond safe limits. The drive took 90 minutes, not toward New Haven and Yale University as Robert and Margaret had been told, but northeast into rural Connecticut, into heavily forested areas where few people lived and fewer asked questions. The facility that Mitchell called the Research Center was actually a converted tuberculosis sanatorium, a sprawling complex of brick buildings hidden behind 12-foot walls topped with barbed wire that Mitchell's superiors had explained away as security measures to protect valuable research. As the car approached the main gate, Emma felt her mother's hand tighten around hers. Margaret had been growing increasingly quiet during the drive, her maternal instincts clearly screaming that something was wrong even if she couldn't articulate what. "This doesn't look like a university," Robert said, his voice carefully neutral but edged with concern. "The main Yale campus is in New Haven, of course," Mitchell said smoothly, "but our specialized research requires isolation from urban distractions. This facility was specifically designed for studying children with unusual cognitive abilities in a controlled environment. You'll see once we're inside, everything is state-of-the-art, and specifically tailored to children's needs. The guard at the gate wore a military uniform with no insignia, checking credentials before waving the car through. Emma noticed her father's jaw tighten at the sight of armed security, so different from the academic atmosphere of a university research center. The facility's interior had been carefully prepared for parental visits. The main administration building featured cheerful yellow walls, educational posters, children's artwork displayed in hallways, and a reception area that looked like it belonged in an elementary school rather than a classified government installation. Mitchell had learned through experience that proper staging during intake prevented parental resistance before contracts were signed. "Welcome to the Cognitive Development Research Center," said a woman in a crisp white uniform as they entered. Her name tag identified her as Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, head of residential services. She had a kind, grandmotherly face that Emma immediately recognized as another carefully constructed facade. "You must be Emma. We're so excited to have you join our program." Mrs. Patterson led them on a carefully choreographed tour, showing them the residential wing where children slept in comfortable dormitories with colorful bedspreads and stuffed animals. She showed them the recreational room with board games, books, and puzzles. She showed them the dining hall where children ate meals together at cheerful red tables. She showed them the classroom where children continued their regular education between testing sessions. What she didn't show them was Building C, the classified wing where the actual experiments took place. She didn't show them the grey rooms with two-way mirrors and recording equipment. She didn't show them the medical facility where children were administered experimental drugs designed to enhance or suppress their abilities. She didn't show them the isolation chambers where subjects who became uncooperative were confined in complete darkness for hours or days until their resistance broke. Throughout the tour, Emma remained silent, seeing through the performance to the truth that lay beneath. She knew that the colorful dormitory they were being shown wasn't where she would actually sleep. She knew that the recreational activities were privileges reserved for compliant subjects who cooperated with testing protocols. She knew that everything her parents were seeing was theater designed to secure their consent before revealing the reality. After the tour, Mitchell led Robert and Margaret into his office, while Mrs. Patterson took Emma to get settled in her room. The moment they were separated, Emma felt the facade begin to crack. "Let's get you into your program uniform," Mrs. Patterson said, her kind voice taking on a brisker, more clinical tone. She led Emma down a different corridor, away from the cheerful residential wing, through a locked door that required a key card to open. The uniform was grey, a simple cotton dress without pockets or embellishments, designed for institutional efficiency rather than comfort or individuality. Emma changed silently, surrendering her own clothes, and with them the last tangible connection to her life in Millbrook. "Very good," Mrs. Patterson said, inspecting Emma with the detached efficiency of someone processing inventory rather than caring for a child. "Now we need to do a baseline medical examination before you begin the assessment process. Follow me, please." The medical facility was in Building B, a wing that hadn't been part of the tour shown to Emma's parents. The examination was thorough and invasive. Blood draws, neurological tests, electroencephalogram readings that required dozens of electrodes attached to Emma's scalp with sticky paste that smelled chemical and wrong. Throughout the process, Emma remained passive and compliant, already understanding that resistance would only make things worse. Dr. James Chen, the facility's chief medical officer, was a thin, nervous man in his 40s who avoided making eye contact with his young patients. "Remarkable baseline readings," he muttered, studying the EEG printout. "Unusual beta wave patterns. Heightened activity in the temporal lobe. Mitchell will want to see these immediately." While Emma was undergoing medical processing, her parents sat in Mitchell's office, reviewing documents that would give the program legal authority over their daughter for the next 6 months. "This is just standard consent paperwork," Mitchell explained, sliding forms across his desk. "Authorization for medical treatment, permission for cognitive testing, acknowledgement of the program's protocols, everything we discussed earlier." Robert read carefully, his accountant's training making him naturally suspicious of complex legal language. "This section says we agree not to discuss the program's methodologies or results with anyone outside the immediate family. Why is that necessary? Confidentiality is crucial in cutting-edge research, Mr. Wells. We can't have our techniques copied by competing institutions before we've published our findings. It's standard academic practice." Mitchell's voice was patient, reasonable, slightly condescending, the tone of an expert explaining necessary complexities to worried laypeople. What the document actually said, buried in dense legal language that Robert struggled to parse, was that the Wells family agreed not to discuss any aspect of Emma's treatment with media, legal authorities, or medical professionals, and that violation of this confidentiality agreement would result in termination of Emma's participation and potential legal consequences. There was also a clause hidden in Section 7, Paragraph 4, subsection C, that gave the facility authority to extend Emma's stay beyond the initial 6 months if therapeutic necessity required it, with therapeutic necessity defined at the sole discretion of the program director, Dr. Harrison Mitchell. Robert hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. Every instinct told him something was wrong, that he was making a terrible mistake, that he should grab his daughter and leave immediately. "Is there a problem, Mr. Wells?" Mitchell asked, his tone still friendly, but with a subtle edge that suggested impatience. Margaret touched Robert's arm. "We've come this far. Emma needs help. We have to try." Robert signed. In that moment, with 3 strokes of his fountain pen, he surrendered legal authority over his daughter to a classified government program that viewed children as experimental subjects rather than human beings deserving protection. By the time Robert and Margaret were ready to say goodbye to Emma, she had been moved to what Mitchell called the Assessment Wing, Building C, the classified section where actual research took place. They met in a small visitation room that looked nothing like the cheerful spaces they had toured earlier. The walls were institutional beige, the furniture was bolted to the floor, and a camera mounted in the corner recorded everything. Emma entered wearing her grey uniform, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, looking impossibly small and vulnerable. Margaret gathered her into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her face. "We'll visit this weekend," Margaret promised, "and we'll call on Wednesday. And if you're unhappy here, if anything feels wrong, you tell us immediately, and we'll bring you home." Emma wanted to tell her mother that weekend visits would be postponed due to critical testing phases, that Wednesday phone calls would be restricted because contact with family interferes with therapeutic protocols, and that bringing her home would become legally impossible once certain procedures were implemented. But she said nothing because she knew her mother needed hope, even false hope, to survive the guilt of what they were doing. "I love you, Mama," Emma said instead. "I love you, Daddy. I'll be okay." Robert knelt down, looking into his daughter's blue eyes, eyes that seemed to hold knowledge far beyond her 7 years. "You're the bravest person I know, Emma. We're so proud of you." "I know, Daddy," Emma said quietly. Then, so softly that only he could hear, she added, "Don't blame yourself for what happens. You didn't know. You couldn't have known." The words sent a chill down Robert's spine. But before he could ask what she meant, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but we need to begin Emma's assessment schedule. Visiting hours are over." The goodbye was brief, brutal, final. Margaret clung to Emma until Mrs. Patterson gently but firmly separated them. Robert had to physically support his wife as they walked out of the visitation room, leaving their 7-year-old daughter standing alone in her grey uniform, watching them go with eyes that had already seen how this story ended. The moment the door closed behind her parents, the facility's true nature revealed itself. "Come with me, Subject 47, Mrs. Patterson said, dropping all pretense of warmth. The use of a number rather than Emma's name was deliberate, a technique designed to depersonalize subjects and break down their sense of individual identity. Subject 47. Emma had become a number, a data point, a specimen to be studied. Building C was a maze of corridors painted institutional grey, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of disinfectant and something else. Fear, Emma realized, the accumulated terror of all the children who had been brought here before her. Mrs. Patterson led Emma to a small room, the grey room from her visions, containing only a metal chair bolted to the floor, a table with strange equipment, and a large mirror on one wall that Emma knew was actually a window allowing researchers to observe without being seen. "Sit down, Subject 47, Mrs. Patterson instructed. "Dr. Mitchell will be with you shortly to begin your initial assessment." Emma sat in the metal chair, her feet not quite reaching the floor, and waited. She could feel eyes watching her through the mirror, could sense the anticipation of researchers eager to begin testing the latest acquisition. On the other side of the two-way glass, Dr. Mitchell stood with his research team, studying Emma through the observation window while reviewing her medical baseline data. "Remarkable specimen," Dr. Chen said, pointing to the EEG readings. "If she really can perceive future events with the accuracy claimed in the field reports, she could revolutionize intelligence gathering. Imagine knowing enemy troop movements before they happen, predicting terrorist attacks before they're planned, seeing technological breakthroughs before competitors develop them." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Mitchell cautioned, though his eyes gleamed with the same excitement. "First, we need to establish the parameters of her ability: range, accuracy, control, limitations. Then we can explore enhancement protocols." He pressed the intercom button. "Subject 47, we're going to begin with some simple exercises. I'm going to ask you questions, and I want you to answer honestly and completely. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, Do you understand? Mitchell repeated, his voice hardening. I need verbal confirmation. Yes, Emma said quietly. Yes, what? Emma understood what he wanted. Submission, acknowledgement of hierarchy, acceptance of his authority. Yes, Dr. Mitchell. Better. Now, subject 47, I want you to tell me what you see happening in this room in the next 5 minutes. Emma closed her eyes, not because she needed to in order to access her visions, but because it was easier than meeting the eyes watching her through the glass. The future unfolded in her mind with perfect clarity. You're going to ask me 7 questions. The third question will be about whether I can control when I have visions. The fifth question will be about whether I can see specific events on command. After the 7th question, you're going to leave to discuss my responses with your team, and Mrs. Patterson will bring me a glass of water and a sandwich because you want to see if basic kindness makes me more cooperative. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. He glanced at his prepared list of questions. Subject 47 had accurately predicted not just the number, but had identified specific questions he had planned to ask. For the next 20 minutes, Mitchell proceeded exactly as Emma had predicted, asking questions that she answered with varying levels of specificity, already implementing her survival strategy of revealing enough to keep them interested, but not so much that they understood the full extent of her abilities. After the 7th question, Mitchell left the observation room to confer with his team. Mrs. Patterson entered with water and a peanut butter sandwich. You're doing very well, dear, Mrs. Patterson said, her kind grandmother voice returning now that Mitchell wasn't present. Just keep answering honestly, and this will all go smoothly. Emma ate the sandwich mechanically, knowing that this small kindness was strategic rather than compassionate, designed to create psychological dependency on her captors. Over the next 3 days, the assessments intensified. Emma was tested for hours at a time, given increasingly complex prediction tasks, asked to foresee events ranging from seconds to weeks in the future. The researchers discovered that her accuracy decreased with temporal distance. She could predict events minutes away with near-perfect precision, events days away with moderate accuracy, and events weeks or months away appeared as fragmentary glimpses rather than clear visions. They also discovered that her abilities couldn't be controlled or directed. The visions came spontaneously, triggered by emotional significance or proximity to the events in question. She couldn't predict lottery numbers or trivial events, only outcomes that had genuine importance to someone involved. On the 4th day, they began pharmaceutical testing. Dr. Chen administered a compound designated as CM47, designed to enhance neural activity in the temporal lobe regions associated with Emma's abilities. The drug was experimental, untested on children, and carried risks that no ethical medical review board would have approved. 20 minutes after injection, Emma began to scream. The visions came in overwhelming floods, hundreds of futures cascading through her mind simultaneously. People she had never met experiencing moments she had no context to understand. Events from hours to years in the future, all demanding attention at once. It was like every television channel in the world broadcasting directly into her brain, a chaos of information that her 7-year-old mind couldn't process or organize. She screamed until her throat was raw, clawed at her head trying to make the visions stop, begged for help that the researchers carefully documented but did not provide. Subject is experiencing enhanced precognitive activity, Dr. Chen noted clinically, watching Emma's suffering through the observation glass. CM47 appears to amplify ability, but subject lacks cognitive framework to process increased input. Recommend reduced dosage for future trials. The drug's effects lasted 4 hours. By the time they subsided, Emma was curled on the floor of the grey room, exhausted and traumatized, her pillow soaked with tears. No one came to comfort her. No one explained what had happened. No one apologized for the suffering they had deliberately inflicted. That night, Emma lay in her actual dormitory, not the cheerful room her parents had been shown, but a stark cell in Building C with a narrow bed, a single barred window, and a locked door. Other children were housed in adjacent cells, and through the thin walls, Emma could hear crying. "Hello?" Emma whispered toward the wall on her left. "Is someone there?" "Sarah," came a small voice from the other side. "Sarah Chen, I've been here 3 months. What's your name?" "Emma Wells. I just arrived 4 days ago." "Did they give you the drugs yet?" Sarah asked. "The ones that make your head feel like it's exploding?" "Yes, today." "It doesn't get better," Sarah said, her voice flat with despair. "They keep trying different drugs, different doses, pushing us until we break. I used to be able to move things with my mind. Pencils, toys, small stuff. Now I can barely concentrate enough to do anything. The headaches are constant. I throw up every day. And they just keep testing. Emma heard the sound of quiet sobbing from the other side. They told my parents I was doing great, Sarah continued. They showed them videos of me smiling and playing games. But those videos were from the first week before the real experiment started. My parents think I'm happy here. They don't know that I cry myself to sleep every night. They don't know that I'm dying inside. How long are you here for? Emma asked. They told my parents 6 months. That was 9 months ago. Every time the 6 months is almost up, Dr. Mitchell tells them I'm making such good progress that extending my stay would be beneficial. And my parents believe him because they want to believe their daughter is special, that she's contributing to important research. Sarah paused, then added, You'll never leave, Emma. None of us will. Not really. Even if they eventually send us home, we'll never leave this place. It stays with you. The grey rooms, the tests, the drugs, the screaming. It becomes part of who you are, and you can never wash it off. Emma lay in the darkness, listening to Sarah's quiet crying, and knew that every word was true. She had seen this future weeks ago, had known what awaited her in the facility, and now she was living through the nightmare that no amount of foreknowledge could prevent or prepare her for. On the wall to her right, another voice spoke, a boy, older, maybe 10 or 11. Don't let them break you, the voice said. That's what they want, to break us down, until we're nothing but abilities they can use. Keep something inside that's just yours, that they can't touch or measure or test. That's the only way to survive. I'm Thomas, the voice continued. Thomas Rivera. I can hear thoughts, which means I know what the researchers are really thinking while they smile and tell us everything is for our own good. They don't care about helping us. They care about weaponizing us. Weaponizing? Emma asked. We're Cold War experiments, Thomas explained, his mental voice bitter. They want to create psychic spies who can read enemy minds, predict enemy movements, see future attacks before they happen. That's what this is really about, not helping gifted children. Creating intelligence assets. Over the following days and weeks, Emma met the other children in the program, 11 total, ranging in age from 6 to 13, each with their own abilities and their own stories of how Dr. Mitchell had convinced their families to surrender them to this nightmare. There was Marcus Johnson, age 6, who could sometimes see events happening in distant locations, though the visions gave him seizures that were getting progressively worse. There was Rebecca Goldstein, age 12, who could occasionally influence other people's emotions, but whose ability was so inconsistent and uncontrollable that the researchers had begun using electroshock therapy to stimulate proper neural pathways. There was David Kim, age 10, who claimed he could sometimes heal small injuries but whose ability the researchers couldn't verify and therefore dismissed as fraud, subjecting him to increasingly harsh motivation protocols designed to force him to demonstrate his claimed gift. Each child was isolated in their own cell, allowed to interact only during carefully supervised recreational periods designed to prevent them from forming alliances or planning resistance. The facility's staff had learned through experience that gifted children working together could be dangerously creative in their attempts to escape or communicate with the outside world. Emma's parents called on the promised Wednesday, but the conversation was carefully monitored and rigidly controlled. Mrs. Patterson sat beside Emma with a hand on her shoulder, a reminder to speak only approved responses. Hi, Mama, Emma said, her voice carefully neutral. Emma, oh sweetheart, we've missed you so much. How are you doing? Are they treating you well? I'm fine, Mama. The testing is interesting. I'm learning a lot. The lies tasted like ashes, but Emma spoke them because she knew that telling the truth would only result in the phone privileges being revoked and possibly punishment for non-compliance. Dr. Mitchell says you're making excellent progress, Margaret continued, relief evident in her voice. He says your abilities are even more remarkable than he initially thought. We're so proud of you, honey. Emma wanted to scream that she wasn't making progress, that she was being tortured with experimental drugs and pushed beyond her limits until she vomited from the neural overload. She wanted to beg her mother to come get her, to save her from the grey rooms and the tests and the endless suffering. Instead, she said, "Thank you, Mama. I'm trying my best. We'll see you this weekend," Margaret promised. Daddy and I are planning to come up on Saturday for the family visiting day. But Saturday came and went without a visit. Dr. Mitchell called the Wells family that morning to explain that Emma was in the middle of a critical testing phase that couldn't be interrupted, but that she was doing wonderfully and sent her love. The visit was rescheduled for the following weekend, then rescheduled again, then postponed indefinitely as Mitchell found new reasons why parental visits would interfere with therapeutic protocols. By the end of October, Emma's parents hadn't seen her in 4 weeks. By the end of November, they hadn't seen her in 8 weeks. And by Christmas, they were being told that Emma was making such remarkable progress that Mitchell recommended extending her stay another 6 months to fully develop her abilities. Robert and Margaret, desperate to believe that their daughter's suffering had meaning and purpose, agreed to the extension. They had no way of knowing that the progress reports were fabricated, that the cheerful letters they received were written under duress, and that their daughter was being systematically broken by experiments that no human ethics committee would have ever approved. Inside Building C, Emma learned to survive by becoming exactly what Thomas had described, a shell of compliance surrounding a core of self that she protected fiercely from the researchers' invasive testing. She answered their questions. She demonstrated her abilities when commanded. She swallowed their drugs and endured the resulting neural chaos. But inside, in the place they couldn't measure or monitor, she remained Emma Catherine Wells, age 7, from Millbrook, Connecticut, who liked chocolate cake and pink bicycles, and playing with her friends Dorothy and Alice. She survived by remembering who she had been before the grey room, and she survived by holding onto a vision she had seen months ago before Dr. Mitchell ever came to Millbrook. A vision of herself, older, scarred, but alive, finally escaping this nightmare and telling the world what had been done to her and the other children. That vision became her anchor, her reason to endure, her proof that this horror would eventually end. She just had to survive long enough to reach that future, no matter what Mitchell and his researchers did to her in the meantime.